What if the most powerful smile in Hollywood vanished in an instant? Not on a red carpet, not on camera, but in a private room where careers are quietly decided and mistakes are never forgiven. Picture this. Crystal glasses clink softly. Low laughter hums like background music. First-time Golden Globes nominees sit a little straighter than usual, knowing this luncheon is more than a meal. It's a test, a silent audition, a moment where you prove you belong. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And then, something shifts. A pause. A look exchanged. Security subtly repositioning. And somewhere in that room, according to multiple conflicting accounts, a single instruction was allegedly given that no one expected to hear from one of Hollywood's most carefully managed figures. Get her out of here. If even part of that is true, this isn't just celebrity gossip. This is a story about power, about access, about the invisible rules that govern elite spaces, and what happens when someone is accused of breaking them. So let me ask you something right now. Have you ever walked into a room where everyone else already knew the rules, and you didn't? Because that feeling, that tension, is at the center of everything you're about to hear. This story matters now because Hollywood is changing, but not in the way people think. The red carpets are louder. The interviews are longer. The platforms are bigger. But behind closed doors, power is becoming quieter, faster, less forgiving. And that's exactly why this alleged incident, one that has never been formally confirmed, denied, or fully explained, has people whispering, not shouting, whispering. Because when powerful people whisper, it usually means something went wrong. The event itself was supposed to be uncontroversial. A first-time Golden Globes nominee luncheon. No cameras, no viral moments, no headlines. Just a carefully curated guest list of people the industry is considering taking seriously. Actors, writers, directors, producers, some with decades of quiet work behind them, some with breakout performances still echoing. This luncheon isn't about celebration. It's about evaluation. Who understands the culture? Who respects the boundaries? Who knows when to step forward and when to stay invisible? That's why every movement in that room matters. Every glance, every conversation, every photo. And that's where Meghan Markle's alleged presence becomes so complicated. Because depending on who you listen to, she was either completely within her rights to be there, or someone who, intentionally or not, crossed a line no one is supposed to cross. Here's where things get murky. Some accounts claim she was invited in an informal capacity. Others suggest she arrived as a guest of a guest. A few insist she wasn't on the original list at all. And in Hollywood, that distinction isn't small. It's everything. Let me explain something most people don't realize. At events like this, invitation status isn't about ego. It's about hierarchy. Who vouches for you? Who is willing to stake their reputation on your presence? Who is prepared to answer questions if something goes wrong? Because if something goes wrong, someone always pays. Now layer another element into this room. Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. A man whose public image is built on warmth, professionalism, and near-universal likability. A man who rarely, if ever, appears in controversy. A man whose reputation is so meticulously protected that even rumors tend to die before they're born. So why is his name attached to this story at all? That's the question people keep circling. Why would someone like him allegedly be involved in a moment like this? Some say he wasn't involved at all. That his name was attached later because of where he was standing or who security answered to. Others claim his influence in that room was unmistakable. Not loud, not aggressive, just final. And here's the contradiction that makes this story so compelling. If nothing happened, why hasn't anyone clearly said so? No statements, no firm denials, no clarifications, just silence. And silence in Hollywood is never empty. It's strategic. Think about it. In an age where celebrities respond to rumors in minutes, sometimes seconds, why would everyone involved suddenly choose restraint? Is it because the story is false? Or because it's complicated? Or because denying it would force people to explain things they'd rather keep invisible? Ask yourself this. Have you ever been in a situation where denying something would actually make it worse? That's where tension lives. According to some versions of events, the alleged issue wasn't the presence itself. It was the movement, the proximity, the cameras. Because in elite industry spaces, photos aren't memories. They're currency. A single image can imply relationships that don't exist, access that hasn't been granted, approval that hasn't been earned. And if someone in that room believed a boundary was being tested, or worse, exploited, that could explain why things escalated so quickly. But again, that's one version. Another version paints a very different picture. In that telling, the entire moment was exaggerated, misinterpreted, blown out of proportion by people who already had opinions. Same room, same moment, completely different conclusions. That's the thing about closed-door events. There is no footage to correct the record, no audio to clarify tone, no public timeline to anchor reality. Only memory, and memory bends, especially when power is involved, especially when reputations are at stake. Now let's talk about why this story refuses to go away. It's not just about Meghan Markle. It's not just about Dwayne Johnson. It's about a larger anxiety in Hollywood right now. Who gets to belong? Who gets second chances? Who is welcomed quietly? And who is tolerated loudly? For years, Meghan Markle has been a lightning rod. To some, she represents resilience and reinvention. To others, controversy and overreach. That polarization means every move she makes is interpreted through a lens that already exists. And when you put someone like that into a room designed for quiet evaluation, friction becomes almost inevitable. Add to that the pressure of first-time nominees, people who feel they've waited their entire careers for this moment, and suddenly the stakes feel personal. Imagine being one of them. You've worked in obscurity. You finally get recognized. And now the room's attention shifts. Not to the art, not to the achievement, but to tension, that resentment, that discomfort. It doesn't need to be spoken to be felt. And that's where the emotional undercurrent of this story really lives. Not in the alleged words, not in the alleged actions, but in the atmosphere. Because multiple attendees, speaking anonymously, describe the same thing. A change in the air, laughter continuing, but thinner, conversations restarting, but cautious, eyes tracking movement they weren't meant to track. Something had happened, even if no one could agree on exactly what. And here's the part that should make you pause. If this were nothing, it would have vanished already. Hollywood buries things effortlessly when it wants to. So why does this moment still ripple? Why do people still lean in when it's mentioned? Why do insiders suddenly choose their words more carefully? Maybe because this story exposes something uncomfortable. That Hollywood's gates are still guarded. That access is still controlled. That power still speaks softly and expects obedience. And maybe because it raises a question no one wants to answer out loud. What happens when someone miscalculates their place in the hierarchy? Do they get corrected quietly or removed? According to some accounts, security moved in not with force, but with precision. Calm, professional, almost apologetic, which makes one alleged detail even more haunting. The claim that there was a request, a plea, just one photo. If true, that changes the tone completely. Because that's not arrogance. That's desperation. And desperation in elite spaces is dangerous. It reminds people of vulnerability, of ambition, of need. Things power prefers not to see. But before we go any further, there's something you need to understand. Every person in that room had something to lose. Every version of this story is shaped by that fact, which means the truth, if it exists cleanly at all, sits somewhere between silence and rumor. And that's exactly why what came next matters so much. Because the moment security allegedly stepped forward, the luncheon stopped being about nominations. It became about boundaries. And once boundaries are enforced, there's no going back. But the real shock wasn't the alleged removal. It was what happened immediately after. This isn't a story that starts with flashing cameras or red carpet glamour. It begins in a room most people never hear about, a place where Hollywood quietly decides who will rise and who will quietly fade away. The first-time Golden Globes nominee luncheon is one of those spaces. Invisible to the public eye, yet fiercely guarded. It's an annual ritual, a private convergence of power, talent, and ambition. And if you've never been invited, you wouldn't understand why anyone would risk being there without an invitation. The room itself is elegant but understated. Long tables arranged to facilitate conversation rather than spectacle, soft lighting to avoid harsh shadows, and staff moving with quiet precision. Each seat is assigned carefully, with the intention of placing people near others who complement or challenge them. Seating arrangements are politics in miniature. A glance across the table, a sip of water, or a polite laugh isn't just decorum, it's strategy. Imagine walking into that room for the first time, knowing that every person present has already earned the right to be there. The nervous energy is palpable. Some attendees glance around, adjusting ties or smoothing dresses, wondering if their presence is being judged even as they try to appear casual. Every interaction, every laugh, every handshake carries weight. It's a ceremony of subtle evaluation. Nothing is announced. Nothing is recorded. No cameras. Just the quiet hum of conversation, punctuated by polite applause for those who have just been introduced. And yet, even in this controlled environment, tensions can flare. People who have spent decades honing their craft, hoping for recognition, are suddenly confronted with newcomers, outsiders, or individuals whose presence is unexpected. This year, the luncheon had more than its usual tension. Some of the first-time nominees were actors whose breakout performances had made waves on streaming platforms. Others were writers whose scripts had quietly won over insiders, but remained largely unknown to the public. And then, there were those who had been around for years, waiting for their moment, hoping that the nomination would finally validate all their hard work. The expectation in this room is almost religious. Respect the hierarchy, acknowledge the achievements of others, and maintain composure at all times. A single misstep can be noticed, remembered, and discussed long after the luncheon is over. And in Hollywood, where perception is currency, missteps can cost opportunities more permanently than any bad review ever could. The moment Meghan Markle allegedly appeared, the atmosphere shifted, though subtly at first. Some claim she arrived with a sense of purpose, moving with confidence, but not arrogance. Others insist that her entry was disruptive, drawing attention away from those whose achievements had earned them a quiet spotlight. The conflicting reports create the tension that fuels speculation. Some attendees say they barely noticed, while others claim they were immediately aware of the disruption. Then there was Dwayne Johnson. Always the larger-than-life figure, his presence adds a layer of psychological weight to the room. Even in a setting where decorum is mandatory, his proximity allegedly influenced how others behaved. People subconsciously adjust when someone known for both power and charisma is nearby. He doesn't need to speak. The energy he carries speaks for him. What makes the luncheon so fascinating isn't just who is present, it's what is left unspoken. The unwritten rules dictate behavior more strictly than any official policy. Who can approach whom, when, and in what manner are all elements of a delicate dance. Breaking the rhythm, intentionally or not, can have consequences far beyond the room itself. And in this environment, the alleged incident involving Meghan Markle becomes more than just a disruption. It becomes a study in power, perception, and the boundaries that govern private spaces in Hollywood. Witnesses describe the scene with cinematic clarity. One recalls the clinking of glasses slowing, as if the room collectively held its breath. Another emphasizes the nervous energy rippling across the room, a tension that wasn't loud but unmistakable. Conversations stuttered mid-sentence. Eyes flicked toward a single point in the room. And somewhere, according to the accounts, a decision was being made that no one was supposed to notice until it was too late. Every gesture carried meaning. Every glance was interpreted. And in such an environment, rumors are almost inevitable. A whispered conversation can be amplified in memory. A polite gesture misread as dismissal. And when combined with the presence of high-profile figures like Meghan Markle and Dwayne Johnson, the stakes are exponentially higher. It's in this atmosphere that the events begin to unfold, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with small, almost imperceptible shifts. A movement across the room, a subtle glance, a pause in conversation that seems longer than it should. These are the moments that insiders recognize as signs of impending disruption. And according to multiple accounts, that's exactly what happened. Some attendees maintain that Meghan's presence wasn't problematic at all. They describe her as composed, courteous, and engaging. Others insist that her arrival shifted the energy of the room, drawing focus and inadvertently placing first-time nominees in the background. The discrepancy in these accounts highlights the central tension of this story, perception versus reality, and how power and influence can shape both. By the time the alleged incident escalated, the luncheon had already established a tone of high-stakes observation. Every attendee was on edge, aware that they were not merely celebrating success, but navigating a minefield of unspoken expectations. And when security allegedly intervened, responding to instructions whispered by someone whose authority was absolute, the room's equilibrium was disrupted in a way that would be remembered, debated, and speculated about for weeks afterward. Even now, the luncheon exists as a ghostly template in the minds of Hollywood insiders, a setting where reputations are cemented or shattered without cameras, without public scrutiny, and without the comfort of hindsight. And in that space, the alleged interaction between Meghan Markle and the security team, guided by Dwayne Johnson's instruction, becomes emblematic of everything that is both alluring and terrifying about exclusive Hollywood events. The unspoken rules, the intense scrutiny, and the razor-thin margin between belonging and being removed. When you walk into a room where every seat, every handshake, and every glance has meaning, your presence carries weight, whether you intend it or not. That's why Meghan Markle's alleged appearance at the first-time Golden Globes nominee luncheon caused such a stir. Some insiders say it wasn't her talent or her star power that drew attention. It was the subtle ways she disrupted the unspoken rhythm of the event. Think about it. In a room full of first-time nominees, some of whom have waited decades for recognition, every newcomer, every outsider, every unexpected guest is measured against the strictest standards. An uninvited smile, a too loud laugh, or an unplanned approach can ripple through the room like a stone tossed into calm water. And in this particular luncheon, the stone allegedly had a name, Meghan Markle. According to multiple accounts, her invitation was irregular, at best. Some witnesses insist that she was officially on the guest list, added quietly as a courtesy due to her celebrity status. Others claim she was a last-minute addition, her attendance facilitated by a friend of a friend. A +1 who wasn't entirely expected. A few even say she wasn't on the list at all and arrived without formal approval, a daring move that in this environment is considered audacious. Why does this matter? Because in Hollywood, who sits where and why is a subtle but powerful language. Invitations are more than paper. They are a signal of status, approval, and access. Being in a room like this without clearance is not just a faux pas. It's a challenge to the hierarchy, a statement that you believe you belong even if the powers that be haven't yet granted permission. The tension was reportedly noticeable the moment she entered. Observers describe a subtle stiffening of shoulders, a brief pause in conversation, and eyes darting toward her path. Was this a reaction to her presence specifically, or simply the natural anxiety of high-stakes networking? That's the contradiction that fuels debate. Some say her confidence was commanding yet graceful, completely in line with a professional accustomed to public scrutiny. Others say it was disruptive, a bold intrusion into a space meticulously curated for first-time nominees. Consider the optics. For years, Meghan Markle has been one of the most visible figures in Hollywood and international media. She carries a persona shaped by public fascination, scandal, admiration, and criticism. Entering a room filled with professionals striving for recognition, her presence inherently alters dynamics, regardless of her intentions. And according to some sources, that's precisely what happened. The room didn't react to her as an individual. It reacted to the energy she carried, the unspoken narrative of celebrity, access, and influence that comes with her name. Here's where it gets even more complicated. In Hollywood, perception often outweighs reality. A single misinterpreted gesture can become a rumor that travels faster than any press release. Some attendees describe Meghan walking through the room, politely greeting people, offering smiles and handshakes, while others claim she was visibly seeking attention, attempting proximity for photographs, or positioning herself in ways that would be inappropriate in such a setting. The truth is impossible to verify because, as always, there were no cameras, no official recordings, and no verified statements at the time. And that's exactly why Dwayne Johnson's alleged involvement becomes central. He wasn't just another attendee. His reputation as a professional, courteous, and controlled figure gave him de facto authority. If someone was pushing boundaries, even subtly, he was in the position to notice and act. But his presence also complicates the narrative. Was he overreacting? Maintaining order? Or was his response a reflection of the unspoken rules of Hollywood etiquette that only insiders fully understand? The underlying tension isn't personal, it's structural. In these elite spaces, the line between inclusion and overreach is razor thin. Attendees must navigate invisible rules about proximity, engagement, and visibility. Being noticed can be a double-edged sword. Too little, and you're ignored. Too much, and you're perceived as intrusive. Some witnesses suggest that Meghan attempted to approach certain tables for photographs, a move that might have been perfectly ordinary in a public setting, but was reportedly perceived as inappropriate in this private luncheon. Others argue that she was merely being courteous, smiling for recognition, and showing support for nominees. Here, perception dominates the narrative. One person's polite gesture is another person's transgression. Hollywood insiders point to one key detail: timing. The luncheon was designed for structured introductions and conversations. Deviating from that rhythm, by moving too quickly from table to table or seeking visual documentation, could upset the delicate balance. And according to some accounts, that's exactly what happened. The room's energy shifted. Conversations paused. Observers noticed subtle changes in posture and attention. Another factor is context. Meghan Markle, for years, has been a lightning rod in both public and industry eyes. To some, she represents reinvention and resilience. To others, she embodies entitlement and overreach. That polarization ensures that every action she takes is magnified, interpreted through existing biases, and debated intensely. In a room of first-time nominees, where nerves are already heightened, her presence allegedly exacerbated an environment already charged with tension. And let's not forget the human element. People at this luncheon weren't just industry figures. They were individuals with ambition, insecurity, and hope. Many had waited their entire lives for this recognition. To suddenly perceive that someone else might be bypassing the unwritten rules can trigger reactions that range from subtle discomfort to overt alarm. And if Dwayne Johnson indeed noticed a boundary being tested, it's easy to see why intervention, however discreet, might have seemed necessary. Some attendees claim that the situation escalated so subtly that it almost went unnoticed. The movement, the glance, the shift in attention, it all happened in moments too fast for outsiders to understand, but painfully slow for those in the room. Others suggest the disruption was more pronounced, creating a palpable sense of tension that could be felt in the chest of every nominee. What's fascinating is that this alleged incident reveals how fragile equilibrium can be in elite spaces. The rules are invisible, yet enforcement is swift. The consequences are real, even if no cameras are rolling. And when someone like Meghan Markle enters a room where she is perceived, rightly or wrongly, as crossing a line, the repercussions extend far beyond that single event. By the time security allegedly became involved, the atmosphere had shifted from quiet observation to something far more charged. Eyes tracked movements. Whispered comments circulated. People recalculated how they should behave. In such a setting, a single action, real or imagined, can ripple through the room, altering how everyone interacts, speaks, and even thinks. And that is why Meghan Markle's presence at the luncheon remains such a point of fascination. Not because of what she did or didn't do, but because it illuminated the unspoken rules that govern Hollywood's most exclusive gatherings. It raised questions about hierarchy, influence, and the ways in which power operates silently but decisively. But just when the room seemed to regain its rhythm, according to eyewitness accounts, something happened that no one expected. A movement that shifted attention, a signal that changed the energy entirely. And that's where the story truly begins to spiral, leading directly to the moment that would ignite speculation and debate across Hollywood insiders for weeks to come. When Dwayne Johnson walks into a room, it's impossible not to notice him. Not because he demands attention, but because the energy around him shifts in ways people instinctively feel before they consciously register it. His presence carries weight, authority, and an unspoken expectation of professionalism that few in Hollywood can rival. And at the first-time Golden Globes nominee luncheon, his proximity allegedly changed everything. Picture the scene. A room filled with first-time nominees, quietly calculating their moves, gauging who to approach, who to avoid, and how to balance ambition with etiquette. And then, Across the room, one of the most recognizable figures in Hollywood, someone whose career spans decades and whose persona combines charisma, strength, and likability, is there. Eyes naturally drift toward him, not in awe, exactly, but in recognition of influence. Why does this matter? Because in a space governed by unspoken rules, influence is the invisible hand that can enforce or relax boundaries. Dwayne Johnson doesn't need to raise his voice or assert dominance. The room perceives the weight of his judgment before he even speaks. And according to multiple accounts, when Meghan Markle allegedly began to navigate the luncheon in ways that some perceived as overstepping, that's when his role allegedly became central. Some witnesses describe him as calm, composed, almost meditative in demeanor. Others suggest a subtle alertness, a tension just beneath his easy smile. In either case, his awareness of the room was unmistakable. He didn't lean in, didn't gesture overtly, didn't confront. But he noticed. And in Hollywood, noticing can be enough. The way power is distributed in these private events relies on perception as much as action. A single glance, a shift in posture, or a whispered instruction can redirect the flow of an entire gathering. It's also important to understand Dwayne Johnson's reputation. He is widely known for being approachable, affable, and professional. He's the kind of figure whose presence often puts others at ease. But this is Hollywood. Even the nicest guy has limits. Even the most professional actor must occasionally assert boundaries when rules, formal or informal, are challenged. And according to some accounts, that's exactly what allegedly occurred. Here's where the drama deepens. Witnesses suggest that when Meghan attempted proximity to certain nominees for photos or conversation, there was a subtle shift in his expression. Some say it was barely noticeable, a flicker of recognition that something was off. Others insist it was unmistakable, a silent acknowledgement that the situation required intervention. In either case, his presence gave weight to the enforcement of the room's unspoken rules. Consider the psychology of this environment. People in high-stakes settings are constantly reading signals, calibrating their behavior based on perceived authority. When someone like Dwayne Johnson is nearby, the stakes become higher. A misstep that might be tolerated in another context suddenly seems riskier. Allegedly, that heightened awareness was what transformed a minor disruption into a full-blown incident. And yet, this isn't about confrontation in the traditional sense. According to accounts, nothing aggressive occurred. No public reprimand, no verbal outburst. Instead, what reportedly happened was subtle, controlled, and deliberate. The kind of intervention that relies on influence rather than force. The mere act of his attention, his alignment with security personnel, and the way he monitored the room sent signals that reportedly changed behavior instantly. The irony is palpable. Dwayne Johnson's public persona is built on inclusivity, kindness, and positivity. He is celebrated for lifting others up, for mentoring younger actors, for maintaining a reputation that balances power with approachability. And yet, in this room, that very authority allegedly became a tool of control, highlighting the fine line between charisma and command. Observers also note the contrast between the public and private Johnson. On screen, he is larger than life, effortlessly charming, almost invincible. Off-screen, in intimate gatherings like this luncheon, he is meticulous, observant, and aware of the subtleties that define professional etiquette. According to some insiders, that duality is what allowed him to notice what others did not. The nuance in Meghan's movements, the timing of her interactions, and the micro-shifts in attention among attendees. There's another factor at play, perception versus reality. Some attendees reportedly saw him as a guardian of decorum, ensuring the luncheon remained a space for its intended purpose, honoring first-time nominees. Others perceived his attention as overbearing, interpreting his calm observation as silent judgment. In environments like this, interpretation often matters as much as action. It's also crucial to understand the role of security. Elite event security is trained to be discreet, responsive, and anticipatory. When someone of Dwayne Johnson's stature subtly indicates attention or concern, it can trigger a chain of responses. Personnel may adjust their positions, heighten alertness, or intervene quietly, all without drawing public notice. And that's allegedly what happened during the luncheon. Security moved, attention shifted, and the room's rhythm changed. Now, imagine being a first-time nominee in that space. You've worked your entire career to be noticed, to be acknowledged, to have your moment. And suddenly, someone else, not a nominee, becomes the center of attention. According to accounts, the presence of Meghan Markle, combined with Johnson's influence, created a dynamic that was impossible to ignore. Nerves, ambition, and perception collided, and in such collisions, even subtle actions are magnified. Some insiders also speculate about intent. Was Dwayne Johnson enforcing rules, maintaining decorum? Or was this an instinctive response to protect the integrity of the luncheon for those whose achievements it was meant to celebrate? The ambiguity adds to the tension, because no one will publicly clarify what he felt, only what they observed. And in Hollywood, observation can be as powerful as action. The alleged result? A room temporarily frozen. Conversations paused, eyes subtly shifting, and somewhere in the background, the quiet, controlled movement of security, allegedly acting under his direction. It was, according to eyewitnesses, a moment that combined authority, discretion, and power without confrontation. A display of influence that left an impression on everyone present. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of his role is what didn't happen. There was no public confrontation, no verbal reprimand, no viral moment captured on camera. And yet, insiders say the message was received loud and clear. Boundaries had been communicated, lines had been drawn, and everyone in that room understood, consciously or unconsciously, that there were consequences for overstepping. In a way, this moment encapsulates Hollywood's private power dynamics. Influence is subtle, authority is silent, and the consequences are often invisible to outsiders. Dwayne Johnson's alleged role highlights how perception, reputation, and presence intersect in high-stakes environments. He didn't need to raise his voice. The room's awareness did the work for him. And just when it seemed the luncheon might regain its equilibrium, according to multiple sources, a small, almost imperceptible interaction set the stage for the next escalation. One that would involve direct engagement, requests, and a decision that reportedly changed the room forever. In Hollywood, a photo is rarely just a photo. It is currency, leverage, and sometimes a declaration of access. And at the first-time Golden Globes nominee luncheon, that principle may have been the spark that ignited an incident still whispered about today. According to multiple accounts, what began as an innocent desire for a keepsake quickly became the focal point of tension, shifting the atmosphere from polite networking to high-stakes navigation of unspoken rules. The moment allegedly began subtly. Meghan Markle, according to some sources, was moving between tables, offering greetings and smiles. Observers describe her as composed, polite, and courteous, a presence that could have been entirely benign. But in an environment where every movement is scrutinized, even the most innocuous gestures can be magnified. It's one thing to wave to someone. It's another to linger, to position yourself, to make yourself the visual focus in a room not designed for public display. And that, insiders claim, is exactly what happened. Some accounts suggest that Meghan was seeking photographs, not for social media, but for personal documentation. She allegedly requested pictures with several first-time nominees, smiling politely, attempting casual conversation. In many public contexts, this behavior would be perfectly normal. In this private luncheon, however, it was perceived differently. The room operates on subtle power hierarchies. Who is allowed to approach whom? Who may be photographed? And which interactions are sanctioned by the organizers? Allegedly, her actions were interpreted as a breach of this delicate protocol. The timing is critical. This luncheon was meticulously planned. Each table, each introduction, each brief conversation had a rhythm designed to honor the nominees. When someone moves outside that rhythm, the entire flow can be disrupted. Some witnesses report a shift in energy. Glances exchanged, subtle tensing of shoulders, and a ripple of unease that spread quietly through the room. Conversations stalled as attendees adjusted to the presence of a high-profile figure whose actions seemed to demand attention. And then there's the nature of photo ops in such private events. Unlike public red carpets, where photographers and media are explicitly part of the environment, private luncheons operate under strict limitations. Cameras are often prohibited or tightly controlled. Requests for photos must be negotiated, usually mediated through organizers, or security. By allegedly seeking photographs on her own initiative, Meghan may have unintentionally violated the implicit rules governing the space. Some witnesses recall her approach as measured, almost tentative. Others describe it as assertive, a visible effort to insert herself into the center of attention. The discrepancy between these accounts illustrates one of the most fascinating aspects of this incident. Perception dominates reality. One person's courteous smile is another's overstep. One person's casual greeting is another's disruption. And in a room where status is enforced invisibly, interpretation carries as much weight as action. Dwayne Johnson's presence amplified the perceived significance of the interaction. While he reportedly did not speak at the moment, his attention, posture, and alignment with security personnel were allegedly enough to signal that boundaries were being tested. When someone of his stature notices a potential breach, the response by those responsible for maintaining order is often immediate, though discreet. This is where the tension reportedly escalated. Security, trained to anticipate and respond to subtle cues, allegedly moved with precision. Observers describe a quiet, deliberate repositioning of personnel, an almost choreographed intervention designed to redirect the flow of movement without causing a scene. It's the kind of action that is invisible to outsiders but unmistakable to those present, a silent assertion of authority and protocol. And yet, the alleged photo request continued. Some sources say that Meghan pleaded for one final image, smiling politely, attempting to capture a fleeting memory. In any other context, this would have been innocuous. But in this environment, where access is tightly controlled and every interaction carries symbolic weight, the act was interpreted differently. It was reportedly the tipping point, the moment when subtle influence transitioned into active enforcement. The accounts diverge sharply at this stage. Some insist she was escorted discreetly aside by security. Others claim she was asked verbally to step back, with Johnson's calm presence serving as reinforcement. A few suggest that she herself withdrew after a polite exchange. The lack of clarity feeds the ongoing speculation. What actually happened, who acted first, and what motivated the responses remain subjects of debate among those present. It's also important to consider the emotional stakes. For first-time nominees, the luncheon is not merely a celebration. It is an affirmation of years of effort, risk, and perseverance. To see someone else, especially a high-profile celebrity, occupying attention in ways perceived as improper can be jarring. According to some insiders, the alleged photo request created a ripple of discomfort that extended beyond the immediate interaction, subtly shifting the mood for the remainder of the event. Psychologically, the situation is a study in contrasts. Ambition collides with etiquette, celebrity presence intersects with established hierarchies, and perception outweighs intention. The tension is palpable. One party seeks a harmless memento, another perceives a breach, and the observers must navigate their own reactions to the unfolding moment. Every glance, every gesture, every micro-expression is interpreted, remembered, and later recounted. And then there's the irony. A simple photograph, intended perhaps as a token of memory, becomes emblematic of power dynamics, boundary enforcement, and social navigation in elite spaces. In Hollywood, even mundane acts are loaded with significance. What is acceptable for some is off-limits for others. What seems trivial in one context is a potential incident in another. The alleged photo request also highlights the role of communication, or the lack thereof. Private events rely on subtle cues. Gestures, glances, and unspoken agreements. When someone fails to perceive or adhere to these cues, the situation can escalate without a word being spoken. According to accounts, that is precisely what happened at this luncheon. The room adjusted, security moved, and attention shifted, all without a single overt confrontation. Observers described the scene as delicate but tense. Conversations resumed, but with a different rhythm. Laughter continued, but with an undertone of caution. Attendees recalibrated their interactions, mindful of the presence of high-profile figures and the invisible rules governing the space. In a sense, the photo op wasn't just about an image. It was about signaling, influence, and the negotiation of social hierarchy. And yet, despite the careful choreography of security and the subtle enforcement of boundaries, the alleged plea for a photograph did not end the tension. Some witnesses insist that Meghan's polite insistence lingered in the air, creating a momentary ethical and social dilemma for everyone present. How do you balance courtesy, ambition, and protocol in a room where a single misstep can carry consequences far beyond the immediate interaction? The answer, apparently, required a silent but unmistakable intervention, a response that, according to multiple accounts, combined authority, discretion, and timing to restore equilibrium. Yet even after this alleged intervention, the room was forever changed. Conversations carried an undertone of caution. Smiles became measured, and the unspoken understanding of hierarchy and boundaries was reinforced more strongly than ever. By the end of the luncheon, one thing was clear: a simple desire for a photo, amplified by perception, timing, and context, had transformed an otherwise routine gathering into a moment of high-stakes navigation. It was subtle, it was controlled, and it was unforgettable to those who witnessed it. But what happened immediately after this alleged interaction, the next words, the next movement, would escalate the tension in ways no one anticipated, leading directly to the moment that would define the story for insiders and rumor alike. 3 words. 3 words whispered in a room full of subtle observation and unspoken expectations, and yet, according to multiple eyewitness accounts, they carried the force of a command. Get her out of here. It's difficult to overstate the impact of words like these in a setting such as the first-time Golden Globes nominee luncheon. There are no microphones, no flashing cameras, no public accountability. Only the room, full of people who know the consequences of protocol, etiquette, and perception. And when words like these are uttered, quietly, deliberately, they can shift the energy of an entire gathering in an instant. Some sources insist that it was Dwayne Johnson who issued the instruction, leaning subtly towards security personnel while maintaining his calm, composed demeanor. Others claim the words were spoken offhandedly, a simple verbal cue meant to redirect attention. The discrepancies highlight the fascinating ambiguity at the heart of this story. In elite spaces, perception is often more important than intent. Witnesses recall the immediate reaction differently. One attendee described a subtle stiffening across the room, as if everyone collectively held their breath. Another said the air seemed to thicken, polite conversation slowed, eyes flicked nervously toward the source of the directive. In such a space, even the softest instruction can have an amplified effect, precisely because everyone understands the underlying power dynamics. Why were these 3 words so significant? Because they allegedly represented not just the enforcement of etiquette, but also the invisible hierarchy of Hollywood. The luncheon wasn't a public spectacle. It was an exclusive evaluation of talent, professionalism, and social awareness. If someone was perceived to have overstepped, even slightly, it was the responsibility of those with influence to act. According to some accounts, these words were that act. Here's the critical point: tone matters as much as words. In a room like this, a command delivered with overt anger would have been disruptive, potentially humiliating. A command delivered with quiet authority, however, is a signal that boundaries are being maintained. And according to multiple sources, the alleged phrasing, calm but firm, conveyed a clear message: the space is regulated, the rules are enforced, and no exceptions are tolerated. The phrase itself has become almost mythic in its simplicity. Get her out of here. 3 words that, if true, instantly altered the social dynamic of the room. But what makes it fascinating is not just the directive itself, but the context. According to eyewitnesses, Meghan Markle allegedly did not resist aggressively. Her response, polite and composed, may have been an attempt to de-escalate while still asserting her place in the room. This is where Hollywood's unique social mechanics come into play. Influence is not always exerted through confrontation. Often, it is conveyed through subtle cues, posture, glance, alignment with others, and, in this case, whispered instructions. A single phrase, uttered quietly, can be more effective than a public rebuke. It preserves decorum while asserting control, a balancing act that requires both awareness and authority. Some insiders describe the moment as almost cinematic. The room continued its rhythm, but with a noticeable undercurrent of tension. Attendees recalibrated their interactions. Conversations became more measured, Eyes were diverted. And somewhere along the perimeter, security began to adjust their positions, subtly signaling that the instruction was being observed and acted upon. There's also the psychological aspect. In high-stakes environments, authority works because people internalize it almost instantly. When someone with influence issues a directive, even a quiet one, the response is often automatic. People move, shift, and adapt without conscious deliberation. According to accounts, this is exactly what happened. Meghan's movement, security's positioning, and the room's collective energy all responded to the subtle command. Yet, ambiguity remains. Some witnesses claim they did not hear the words at all, only noticing the effects, the slight pause, the subtle realignment of space, the flicker of attention toward a specific interaction. Others swear the phrase was spoken clearly, directing immediate action. This divergence underscores one of the central themes of the story. Memory, perception, and narrative collide in ways that make objective truth difficult to ascertain. Another fascinating element is how such a moment can echo beyond the room. Even without cameras or official statements, stories like this propagate through whispered accounts, anonymous reports, and media speculation. The alleged phrase becomes emblematic, a shorthand for power, protocol, and control. It crystallizes a narrative. Someone tested boundaries, authority responded, and etiquette was enforced, all in a matter of moments. Some attendees reportedly interpreted the phrase as an overreach. They wondered, was this a necessary enforcement of rules or an excessive assertion of influence? Others saw it as a protective measure, ensuring that the luncheon maintained its intended focus on first-time nominees rather than celebrity intervention. These differing interpretations feed the ongoing fascination with the incident. And then there's the reaction of the person at the center of it, the alleged recipient of the instruction. According to accounts, Meghan Markle did not escalate or resist overtly. Some say she paused, assessed the room, and chose compliance, understanding the subtle but firm message conveyed. Others claim she politely pleaded for one final opportunity to be part of the interaction. A request that added another layer of complexity to the situation. What's striking is the immediacy of the impact. Security personnel reportedly acted almost instantly, repositioning to guide the flow of movement without creating a scene. Conversations were subtly redirected. Laughter resumed, but with a different cadence. And through it all, the unspoken lesson became clear. Boundaries were reinforced, and everyone present understood that deviation could be noticed and corrected. Without public fanfare, this alleged incident exemplifies the delicate balance of power in elite Hollywood spaces. Authority is exercised quietly, influence is communicated subtly, and enforcement is carried out with discretion. 3 words, "Get her out of here," allegedly carried the weight of that entire ecosystem, signaling that decorum, protocol, and hierarchy remain paramount, even amidst glamour and celebration. And yet, the story doesn't end here. Because while the alleged command may have momentarily restored equilibrium, it also set the stage for further escalation. Pleas were made. Requests lingered. And what happened next, what some witnesses claim was a moment of desperation and insistence, would push the boundaries of etiquette, power, and influence even further. After the whispered command allegedly echoed through the room, a moment of silence followed. Not the kind of silence that fills a room when people are simply listening, but the kind that carries weight, the pause where the entire space seems to breathe collectively, aware that a boundary has just been reinforced. And in that pregnant silence, according to multiple eyewitnesses, Meghan Markle allegedly made a plea. It wasn't loud. It wasn't confrontational. But it was direct, sincere, and unmistakable. Sources claim she asked, implored, even, for one final photo. Just a small image, a memento to commemorate her presence at an event she had reportedly traveled to attend, one that recognized first-time nominees. In almost any other context, this would have been trivial, even cordial. At the first-time Golden Globes nominee luncheon, however, the plea carried enormous implications. Why? Because in Hollywood, context is everything. The room had just experienced a subtle but unmistakable assertion of authority. Boundaries had been communicated without fanfare, and attendees were acutely aware that deviations could have consequences. Asking for a photo, after the room had been realigned, was seen by some as pushing the limits, testing how much influence one could exert despite the unspoken rules. Eyewitnesses described the moment as tense yet measured. Some say Meghan's tone was calm, almost pleading, her hands clasped lightly, her posture deferential. Others claim it was confident, a controlled attempt to navigate the space while still asserting her place. The duality of these reports underscores the difficulty of reconstructing events in such a charged, private setting. Perception here is everything. What one person sees as a polite request, another interprets as audacity. Dwayne Johnson's alleged response, or lack thereof, was just as pivotal. Some accounts suggest he maintained a composed, observational stance, letting security act on the cues he had subtly given. Others claim he leaned in slightly, his gaze conveying authority without words. In both cases, his presence magnified the significance of the interaction. In a room filled with first-time nominees, every microexpression, every gesture carries weight, and his attention reportedly heightened the intensity of the moment. The role of security in this alleged interaction was critical. Trained to anticipate both subtle cues and potential disruptions, they reportedly positioned themselves to subtly manage the situation without drawing attention. According to insiders, the team moved with precision, guiding the flow of space around Meghan while ensuring that no public spectacle occurred. Their quiet enforcement exemplifies the balance between authority and discretion that defines private elite gatherings. Observers also noted the emotional undercurrent. First-time nominees, already nervous, were acutely aware of the drama unfolding. Laughter and conversation continued, but with a delicate, cautious rhythm. Attention shifted subtly, as attendees recalculated where to focus, what to say, and how to navigate an environment where influence and perception were intertwined. The room, in essence, became a theater of silent power dynamics, where a single plea could ripple outward and affect everyone present. The tension was compounded by the contradictory nature of the interaction. On one hand, the plea was reportedly respectful, polite, and seemingly harmless. On the other, it directly challenged the boundary that had just been reinforced. The paradox created a moral and social puzzle for those present. How do you honor courtesy while maintaining the authority and decorum that the room demands? Some insiders suggest that Meghan's request was emblematic of a larger pattern in her public and professional life, a blending of confidence, access, and visibility that often conflicts with established hierarchies. To some, it was a harmless, human moment. To others, it was a calculated push against invisible boundaries. That ambiguity is part of what makes this story so compelling and so controversial. Timing, as always, played a crucial role. The plea occurred immediately after a moment of tension, when security and authority were already subtly on alert. This proximity heightened the stakes. What might have been an innocuous request elsewhere became a test of protocol, influence, and social skill. And in spaces like this, tests rarely end quietly. It's worth noting that responses in elite gatherings are often as much about perception as about action. According to multiple sources, attendees watched not just the interaction itself, but how others, particularly figures of authority, responded. The room was, in essence, analyzing the analysis, a layered dynamic of observation and interpretation that magnifies even the smallest gestures. Some accounts describe Meghan withdrawing after her request, while others claim there was a brief negotiation, a moment where subtle cues, eye contact, and body language determined the outcome. Either way, the interaction reportedly left a lasting impression, not just on those involved, but on the entire atmosphere of the luncheon. Conversations resumed, but with a new rhythm, a quiet acknowledgement that boundaries had been tested and reinforced simultaneously. The alleged plea also underscores the delicate interplay between intent and perception. While her goal may have been simple, a photograph, the reception of that goal was colored by hierarchy, context, and the invisible rules of the room. In environments like this, it's not just what you want, but how your desire is perceived that determines consequence. And then, as the luncheon continued, the energy in the room reportedly shifted again. Attendees who had been momentarily captivated by the unfolding drama refocused, but the subtle undercurrent of tension remained. The room had witnessed a negotiation of power, a silent assertion of authority, and a challenge to boundaries, all without a single public spectacle. But even after the alleged plea was addressed, the story was far from over. Because while the immediate tension may have been managed, the implications of that moment, how influence, etiquette, and perception intersected, would ripple outward, setting the stage for further developments that no one at the luncheon could anticipate. In high-profile Hollywood events, security is rarely just about safety. It's about control, timing, and subtle influence. And at the first-time Golden Globes nominee luncheon, according to multiple eyewitness accounts, that subtle influence allegedly became the key to resolving the tension that had escalated with the photo request. Imagine the room: soft lighting, long tables, muted conversations, punctuated by polite laughter. First-time nominees are cautiously navigating the social space, aware of both their own nerves and the presence of seasoned celebrities. Then, after the whispered command and the subsequent plea, security allegedly moves. Not aggressively, not publicly, but with deliberate precision. Every step, every gesture designed to restore order without drawing attention. Observers describe security personnel subtly repositioning themselves near Meghan Markle, forming an almost invisible perimeter that guided her movement without creating a scene. Their intervention was surgical. According to accounts, it wasn't about confrontation, it was about influence. Their presence served as a silent signal that the rules of the luncheon were to be respected. This is the fascinating aspect of elite Hollywood events. Power often doesn't announce itself. It operates in micro-moments. A glance, a shift in posture, a quiet instruction. These are the tools of authority. Security, under the subtle guidance of someone like Dwayne Johnson, can enforce boundaries without raising a voice. And according to eyewitnesses, that is exactly what happened. Some sources insist that Meghan complied immediately, recognizing the direction without resistance. Others suggest she paused, evaluating the situation before moving in accordance with the subtle cues. Either way, the presence of security transformed what could have been a visible confrontation into a controlled, quiet resolution. The room, however, remained acutely aware of the interaction, and the energy was irrevocably altered. It's important to understand why this matters. In Hollywood, private events are governed by unspoken hierarchies and rules. Security is trained not only to protect, but to reinforce those hierarchies subtly. By intervening, they weren't just guiding a single individual, they were signaling to everyone in the room that boundaries exist and must be respected. The effectiveness of their actions lies in their discretion. The moment passes, but the message lingers. Eyewitnesses describe the interplay between security and Meghan as almost choreographed. Their movements were quiet but deliberate, creating space for her while simultaneously reasserting control over the flow of the room. The intervention was invisible to the casual observer, but crystal clear to those attuned to the nuances of social hierarchy in elite spaces. What makes this moment compelling is the tension between compliance and assertion. On one hand, the individual being guided, allegedly Meghan, had agency and could have resisted or challenged the direction. On the other, security's subtle enforcement, coupled with the implicit authority of someone like Dwayne Johnson, created a psychological pressure that made compliance almost automatic. It's a masterclass in influence without aggression. Some insiders point out that this quiet intervention also served another purpose. It protected the first-time nominees. Their presence and recognition were supposed to be the focus. By redirecting attention, security allegedly ensured that the intended purpose of the luncheon, to honor emerging talent, was preserved. The disruption was managed swiftly, invisibly, and with minimal overt drama. Yet, even with the intervention, the room was not returned to its original equilibrium. Conversations resumed, but with a measured caution. Laughter continued, but it carried a subtle undercurrent of awareness. Attendees had witnessed a negotiation of boundaries and power that underscored the fragile balance of elite gatherings. Every subsequent movement was now colored by the knowledge that rules, although invisible, were enforced decisively. Another critical point is the psychological ripple effect. Security's quiet intervention communicated more than just enforcement. It reinforced hierarchy, power, and etiquette. Everyone in the room absorbed the message, consciously or subconsciously. Deviations are noticed, influence matters, and authority operates silently but decisively. The alleged intervention also highlights a broader theme in Hollywood's private spaces. Appearances are not the sole measure of influence. Authority is often invisible, operating through microactions and perception. Security, in this case, acted not just as protection but as an extension of influence, maintaining order while reinforcing the social and professional architecture of the luncheon. According to some sources, the interaction ended without public confrontation, yet the room remained charged. Attendees recalibrated their behavior, adjusting conversations, body language, and engagement strategies. The incident became an invisible landmark, a reference point for both caution and awareness in the remainder of the event. And then, just when the tension seemed to settle, there was another subtle shift. A movement, a look, a change in posture. So small it could have gone unnoticed, yet significant enough that multiple witnesses later recalled it in detail. It signaled that while the immediate conflict had been managed, the story was far from over. Because in elite environments, interventions like this don't conclude incidents, they transition them. The quiet enforcement of boundaries sets the stage for further negotiation.